digital transformation for the quarrying industry, and we've labelled it Up the Digital Creek with a Paddle. And the reason for that is that we often see when we're talking to our clients about how they have great ideas and great ambition to move into the digital space. They see cost as a big prohibitive factor in that, but often they actually already have the tools available to them to move forward with a digital transformation. And I'll share some examples and just set some context for that. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll see a bit about how you can actually explore what you might have at your disposal already and how you can do that cost effectively. So just a bit about me. So I'm the director of bora. We are a IT consultancy. We specialize in digital transformation. And I've spent, it has now ticked over sadly to 2 decades of working with a lot of organizations to build digital innovation and looking at how we can apply technology to challenges that businesses have in every day of their operation. And I talk to various leaders from our client base on a daily basis, and what I'd like to do is just share the story of some of those conversations, some of those things that we've worked on together, and how we've discovered that they already have those tools, and suddenly realized that they could take massive leaps forward without needing lots of investment. So to start off with, what do we often hear that clients want to achieve? Well, we see this real conflict often. Okay, so they will have these sales pitches coming in which have got the word digital peppered all over them. Whether it's drone site mapping, whether it's plant and vehicle telemetry feeding in and giving world-class analytics, that downward pressure comes from product vendors all the time. But the reality is that a lot of businesses are still working on paper-based systems. They're not really digital ready, whether that's in terms of the people that are working within the organization, whether that's because they have old legacy systems that are still running. They may be very heavy on paper, and fundamentally, they may not actually have a data store to actually keep all of the data that something like drone mapping or telemetry will give them. So it's all very well and good that they are sold something that can revolutionize the business, but then all of a sudden there's nowhere to actually put the data that feeds. So that's where we often get into having conversations around, well, how do we move forward? How do we start to break that conflict and actually move forward so that those things can happen and can deliver value? So if we look at that creek, that people end up thinking, well, how am I going to solve these issues? There's several key themes that start to come through. Okay, and the big desire often, let's remove paper from the business. Let's really drive that out. Why would we do that? Well, because minimize process latency. So, the time it actually takes to get a piece of paper from one part of the business to another to actually do something with it. Paper, is by definition lightweight. It's, a piece of paper that is easily lost, particularly in an environment where you're working out on a site where you're really, having exposed to the elements. And people who are trying to focus on safety rather than whether they've got a nice, neat, tidy stack of paper. Rekeying is another massive overhead that we see people struggling with when there's a piece of paper, they need to get it in, and they have to manually enter or they have to scan these bits of paper. And it's a big one that people want to get rid of. The next one is removing barriers. So we often hear that there's some form of barrier to the adoption of technology. That could be down to the people expecting to use that technology. It could be a level of training. It could be just a belief in change and moving away from the concept of we've always done it this way, why should we move? But the other big piece is, of course, cost, and often putting in big systems that are out there on the market can just be a massive barrier. We all know the pressures that we're under. We only need to look at the last 3 weeks to see what's going on with the economy, and trying to get something in that delivers benefit for the minimum of cost is obviously something that everyone wants to achieve. When you then look at the next one that comes through, it's about streamlining process. So how do we introduce workflows between systems to stop this siloed data, having one thing happening in one system and another happening in another? How do we set up systems to actually work for us rather than simply being passive data stores, right? So how do we get the systems to tell us what we want to do and what we need to do rather than us having to go and find that out? And then how do we drive out inefficiency? So how do we make sure that the real focus there is on getting the job done rather than managing the system itself and having to delete data on a regular basis or run jobs to make things happen. And then probably the one that underpins it all is a thirst for knowledge, right? And how do we, as organizations, make sure that we have really good, solid, managed, integrated data that then transfers into information we can then transfer into knowledge, and having that in a way that comes from all of the systems we use and can actually be curated. Coming back to what I was saying before about making sure that things are triggered and excuse me, given good calls to action that we can actually run and use to review back, facilitate strategy, but also tell people how to move forward in their day, through insight that comes in. So having looked at that, we often help people to really think about what are their needs and their wants and their opportunities, their challenges, and take a good look at their internal processes, their capabilities. And what we find is that there's then a counterbalance to all of that. Okay, so how can they deal with this? Well, wider awareness and training is often the answer to some of the challenges. Yeah, so it may be that it's just a case of helping employees to actually use the technology they have, and to a broader benefit, and actually using the functionality that's there to them. And I think that's a really important one that comes back to what we're here today to talk about, which is often the tools are already there, people just don't know how to use them. The second thing is using modern technology. So how do we start to use all of these things that are actually readily available, fully supported, so that we don't have to worry about the server under the desk or making sure that something's working properly, and also gain the benefit of continuous improvement in that technology by subscribing to it and making it a part of our operation. Then the third thing really is, how do we scale solutions? So often what we find is there'll be one guy who knows how to use a tool really well, but the rest of the team don't. Or there'll be one part of the business that's using something and the rest of the business isn't. And it's also coming back again to what I'll be talking about in a minute, which is those tools that are already there in the toolbox but go completely untouched because we don't know either that they exist or we don't know how to get started on using them. And these are the sort of key things that we tend to really work with people to build out and make happen for them, so that it really is delivering the benefit that they originally signed up for. And so the point is that framework's already there, they're already in place. All we need to do is actually build around them, yeah, and actually make them into a fuller, richer solution that can really deliver some digital transformation. Now, everyone on this call will likely have different systems in place, different frameworks that they use, different office tools that they use. But I've just chosen, two of the big ones, right? So Microsoft Office 365 and the Google Suite. And when you look at these, often companies will be using these from the perspective of basically what we call digital paper. Yeah, so they'll be using things like Microsoft Outlook, they'll be using Google Mail, Google Sheets, Calendar, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Google Docs. That's great, very powerful, great solutions, and yes, sort of driving out paper, but really only digitizing what they have at the moment. And when you look at those images on the screen right now, you can see there's all these other tools that just don't get used. Yeah, and they are incredibly powerful, very customizable, very easy to use, very quick to deploy, for a whole range of different situations and use cases. And if I look at, some of the areas that we have, particularly within the quarrying space, and where these come in really useful is with those back office capabilities that we might have. So it could be anything from dispatch to order management, to quotations, sampling, all of these things that need managing, have process attached to them, and often resort to paper or digital paper when it comes to actually making them happen. And I just want to choose two that we've worked on ourselves that sort of just illustrate the point. And if I look at one of our clients, they were struggling with approval management for documentation, and they were struggling with document management itself. And that was across everything, whether it's contracts, quotes, risk assessments, you name it. And they'd actually gone off to some big companies based out of California who have document management platforms. And they got some eye-watering figures come through in terms of how much it was going to cost to solve their problem. And I'll tell you in 2 seconds how much that actually was. But we just showed them an alternative solution that was actually using what they already had. And it was really simple. So first of all, SharePoint, which many of you will have heard of, but is a really powerful document management tool. And when it's configured properly and not just used as a sort of a glorified filing cabinet, but is actually coupled with all of the metadata and the information about documents, is really powerful. And we then coupled that with Power Automate, which is again from the Microsoft stack, and managed all of the approval cycles. So this sat underneath SharePoint, and what it did was when new documents arrived, when they were edited, it understood what needed to be done, it understood who needed to approve that, it sent emails to request approval, it marked them as approved when they were, it managed any review comments and rejections, and actually gave the whole solution. So 2 really simple components that the client was already had in their estate, and was really, really good at solving the problem. And when you look at the original price they were quoted by the big tech in California, that was £2,000 a month. And actually, the final solution only cost them $5,000 to build, and it didn't actually cost a single penny extra on top of what they were already paying, because they were already paying for these tools from Microsoft. They just weren't using them, or they weren't using them to their full potential. And that's a really key thing. So then when you look again then at you know, those capabilities, the second story I'd just like to share is another client that was struggling with vehicle management and plant inspections. So what they were doing was having triplicate pads printed on a regular basis, and was part of their regular inspection process. You know, they were generating thousands of forms a year. They were meant to make it back to the office to be logged and recorded. Some did, as it says on the screen, some blew away, and some are probably still folded up somewhere in the cab of the vehicle. Some of them with some HB sauce on, probably from when the driver had a bacon sarnie. And what we did was we showed them an alternative solution. So, you know, using the tools already at their disposal once again. And this was again within the Microsoft stack. So what we did was we used Power Apps, which is using a theory called low code, which means you don't have to be a software developer to build this. It's all about plug and play of different components, very easy to set up. Set up the concept of vehicles and plants, set up the concept of an inspection, be able to report off the back. And then again, we brought our friend Power Automate in. So what this started to do then was some really cool stuff, which it was impossible to stay on top of when it was all paper-based, which was, when was the last time something was checked? Are there any immediate issues we need to sort out? How often does the same thing go wrong with the same piece of plant? And bringing those pieces to the attention, raising alerts to the management of the team. And if you look at that, thousands of paper forms per year. What we put in was something that, again, really cheap to build and only cost £6 per month per user to Microsoft. And this was really powerful because actually they were practically spending more of that on creating these pads. And of course, the benefit was huge. So finally, to wrap up, what should you do next? Yeah, what would be our recommendation, having told this story? If you're looking to do digital transformation, if you see that you have a need for really taking your current processes, making them more intelligent, making them more digital, don't be put off by when you Google some of the solutions and applications that are out there and think, it's too expensive, I can't do it. I can't fit that in a budget for next year. I can't fit that in a budget for the next 5 years. So have a look at, what are your pain points? What are your needs, your wants, your opportunities? Consider how technology you already have and pay for might be used to actually make those better, right? And actually address those. And give it a go. Pilot it with just one thing. And then see the benefit, learn the lessons, but fundamentally have a strategy, right? So always think through, coming right back to that first slide, where one of the big issues was underpinning data. Make sure that you're always thinking through how that's all going to fit in. Gradually build a picture of your data, so that then the next time that somebody tries to sell you drone mapping, or the next time that somebody tries to sell you the best piece of telemetry software, you've actually got somewhere to put all that data, and it feeds into all your other systems that are running. And that was just 20 minutes to essentially tell you that story and take you through the journey that we've been through and just share some insight into what we've been hearing. I hope it's been really useful. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Peter. Just one on sort of data. I think I don't know about anybody else, but we certainly get swamped with data from all sorts of different systems. Have you had much experience in sort of consolidating those at all?
Yeah. So I think there's two pieces always with data. Okay, there's how do you view data as a business? So what to you do you want your data to be structured like? What's your definition of data? And then there's the technical side, which is how do you consolidate different systems into that model, right? Because what we often see is that it's a case of first come, first serve. Whichever system was implemented first, so all of a sudden that's defined the data model for the business. And then as you bring other things in, they don't quite fit, and you need to do translation and all the rest of it. So what we often do is encourage people to take a step back, think about what they actually want that data to look like from a business perspective, and then consolidate from there, rather than letting one system take the lead. And then it's about setting up some very good integration. Okay, and again, this is actually a great question, because this is another thing you can do with things like Power Automate, Logic Apps, which is another part of the Microsoft stack that's there and ready for people to use. And you can actually tie that in, build a central database, and tie these different systems in to begin consolidating. And yeah, that is actually the only route. You have to take that route to then get decent reporting. Otherwise, what you end up doing is pulling a report from one system, pulling a report from another, and then spending a day in front of Microsoft Excel trying to merge the two, right? And so yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big challenge, but it's something that always is there and underpinning as a piece that people need to solve from a business perspective first.
Okay. And are there many systems that are particularly good at sort of the exception reporting? Because that's something that we've tried to focus on. Instead of having a report for everything, have an exception report for the stuff that is not quite right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I mean, the best way to handle it really is using some of the standard systems that are out there. So you've got things like Tableau or Power BI or Snowflake, which are, you know, good analytics systems, which you can set up to just point it at data, and then actually you can configure those exceptions, right? And start to look at, okay, where is this data off? Where is there a problem I need to investigate? And again, actually, you know, coming back to, is there tools out there that you might already have? Absolutely, those are there, you know, where you can set up, and I talked about some of that, particularly in that last example around the plant inspection, where the client ended up using Power Automate to basically say, right, on a daily basis, I'm going to check, have I had an inspection for every single piece of plant in the last week? Fire off an email, alert, I haven't, you know, or, and I think just doing some of those simple things actually starts to deliver a lot of benefit. So yeah, those systems are absolutely there. I think it always depends on individual companies' requirements, but again, there's some very cheap solutions out there that basically apply the sort of if this then that principle and can send out notifications based on those data exceptions.
Okay, thank you. And so one final one for me, but does the Google Suite have similar functions to the Microsoft Power app?
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned?
So you know, you've got a whole suite of tools there, and something that's very powerful within Google is the scripting, and so you can very easily set up scripts that actually will manipulate data, do different things there. And you've also got, you know, very good automation and data flows that can start to move things around and build workflow. So it's all there. It's just a case of really starting to identify, you know, where it can be applied and then really making use of it, you know, and enjoying the benefit. And you know, I think it's worth saying, I just put up Microsoft and Google as probably two that would resonate with people, but obviously there's a whole bunch of other suites as well that are out there that people use that really have just the same functionality and can be set up very quickly and easily.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody any further questions at all? I don't think we've had any posted on the chat, but opportunity to ask away.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I've got a quick question, if I may. In terms of the data, I presume it all has to be in the cloud somewhere to work, rather than on servers. Yes. And other. Yeah.
I mean, that's the best way to go about it now, because the amount of churning of data that happens now, there is so much. You know, as a business, you want to focus on actually doing what you do best, which is your core operation, you know, and having to build servers and manage databases and all the rest of it is not what you set up shop to do, right? So absolutely, putting that in the cloud, very cost effective. You know, you get charged based on what you use, rather than, you know, buying a huge piece of tin that you might not be using all the time. And it just means that you can then plug so much into it. You know, if you've got other systems, it's very easy to connect them to exchange data, rather than having to worry about, you know, how do I actually get that system over there to, you know, travel down a copper wire and start to pull some of my data. So yeah, cloud is absolutely the way to go for that.
Yeah, and do the various clouds, this is my naivety, I suppose, but do the various clouds interact? So for example, if some was in Amazon Web Services and the rest was on Google, are they friendly, or do they kind of block one another then?
No, yeah. So that while they've been challenged for anti-competitive stuff quite a lot, that's one thing they haven't done. Yeah, I mean, typically what you find is obviously you'll get a lot more out of the box connectors, right? So if you're you know, I don't know, using an AWS cloud and then you use an AWS analytics system, that will, you know, be very easy to set up. It's going to create a bit more effort to connect a Microsoft Power BI to your AWS database, but absolutely it's possible. There's no blocks to doing it. You just need a bit more configuration, that's all.
Okay, nice one. Okay, thank you. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Anybody for any more? No. Okay. Well, thank you, Peter. We'll bring the lunchtime webinar to a close, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody for attending.